So for our readings today, I've got a really short passage from Proverbs and then a very long poem that I'll share with you. But first, let's get Proverbs. Oh, too many windows open. This is Proverbs 31, 8 to 9. Speak up for people who have no voice, for the rights of all, the down and outers. Speak up for justice. Stand up for the poor and destitute. And then I'm going to share my screen for this one. Now, this is a resource that my seminary handed out. I've linked it on, you know how I created a web page for you all on my website? As soon as we finish with this poem, I will give that to you because I've uploaded this. There's a whole load of resources that I thought some of you might want to know. So the article is called Healing the Trauma of Racism. It's got loads of very interesting information, including some of the definitions that people use about internalized racism and externalized racism. I found it very helpful. And then at the very end, there's this amazing poem by one of the ministers from my seminary, who is a woman of color, Reverend Laureen Williams. And I'd like to read it. Don't turn away. Black body grabbed by white hands, pulled from car, taken from Africa. Chains of yesteryear have become handcuffs of today. Armed, unarmed, it doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of my skin. Don't turn away. Black body walked by white hands, stood up against the wall, placed upon the auction block. Under the white gaze, black humanity in a haze, male, female, it doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of my skin. Don't turn away. White mouth open, black value consumed, from slave and property to thug and criminal, from sexual and disposable to silenced and dismissed, educated and accomplished, poor and arrested. It doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of my skin. Don't turn away. White hands in pockets, black hands trapped behind back, white-faced, expressionless, black cries of suffering, apathy and misery, inflicting harm and internalized trauma. It doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of my skin. Don't turn away. The uniform of blue keeping the uniformity of white, keeper of the law of white supremacy through the enforcement of black inferiority. The crime punishable by death is my existence in black skin. Middle passage, mass incarceration, plantation, public housing, property of whiteness, prop for whiteness. It doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of my skin. Don't turn away when knee on black neck, literal, metaphorical, 8 minutes, 46 seconds, 401 years. Dominant, oppressive, pervasive, insolent. Revolts of yesteryear, protests of yesterday, uprisings of the past, upheavals of today, uncertainty and fear, urgency and fire, business over bodies, livelihoods over lives, profits over people. It doesn't matter when the dangerous weapon is the color of white skin invented against my skin. It all matters in every matter of life, in all matters of living, in all manners of living, for black lives, for white lives, for all the lives in between. Will you disarm your white skin that we might all stand in the American sun, remembering we are all born under the African sun? Don't turn away. White knees atop black bodies, kneeling to a white God, eyes to an elusive heaven, minds in an intractable hell, black and blue, of the red, white, and blue. And again, I say, don't turn away. Will you disarm your white skin? It all matters because these black lives consumed by your white can't breathe. Amen. Strong, strong poem. And before we go any further, I'm going to put the link in the chat that will give you that link to that resource and that poem and a bunch of other things that I will share today. So here's that Proverbs again. Speak up for the people who have no voice, for the rights of all the down and outers. Speak up for justice. Stand up for the poor and the destitute. So I have to tell you a little bit about where today's sermon came from. A few weeks ago, I invited you all to come to the worship meeting, the worship planning meeting, and I said, if you have any prayers or songs or things that you want to include, and I was very surprised when, when I got an email from Jane and Dick saying, we'd like to bring a conflict that we had to worship. I was like, oh. And I think that that's a really good example of how, why I'm excited to be working with you as a congregation. So in a little while, we're going to hear about that very conflict that came up between Jane and Dick and how they handled it and what came out of it. So that's what all of today has come from, is something that you all brought me, and then this was my thoughts about it. So here we go. Dear God, may the words of my mouth speak truth and be an offering to those that hear. And as Simon, I say, please take what is useful and discard the rest. So many of us here care deeply about institutional oppression. But at the same time, we find ourselves not knowing what to do or stay, especially if we're sitting in a seat of privilege by our society's norms. It can be difficult to know how to be an ally, how to make sense of stories that are described from a world that's so different than our own. And I think this next piece, it's a reflection by Joe Hellerman. It's on the Talbot School of Theology blog. The post title was Sharing God's Truth in Times of Trouble, Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. Right, and this is what Joe writes. The following post has been circulating on Facebook. This is it. 2,000 years ago, Jesus ended the debate over which lives matter. He died for all. End of quote. Powerful, huh? The statement is true, biblically true, but this post on Facebook bothered me. It bothered me a lot. And this, in turn, created a cognitive dilemma that I could not get off my mind. As I sat practicing the piano several hours later, I kept asking myself, why would such a central biblical truth, one which this New Testament professor has dedicated my entire adult life, trouble me so much? When I see it displayed on a large poster on Facebook, why is this troubling me? Shouldn't I be rejoicing that the gospel is going forth? After some reflection, I realized that I have several problems with Christians sharing sentiments like this, phrases like this, in our current social context. Truth is important, but sometimes timing is even more so. As the author of Proverbs wrote, a word in season, how good it is. That's Proverb 15. Problem 1. The post explicitly takes the focus off the issue at hand. Yes, Jesus died for all, but not all are currently being equally marginalized and brutalized by our criminal justice system. The post, obviously written in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, fails completely to acknowledge the pressing social reality that generated the movement to begin with. And perhaps an analogy will help here. There are 88 keys on my digital piano. When all the keys are working, I can happily assert all keys matter. But when a band of 6 of those piano keys suddenly goes silent, I don't need to be reminded that all keys matter. What I need to do is take my keyboard to the repair shop, identify the problem, trust the technician, direct all their resources to fix the bank of broken keys. Because at times like this, it's the bank of broken keys, only the bank of broken keys, that really matters. At a time like this, some keys matter more than others. As Jesus said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Matthew 9. And that's the end of the blog post that I'm sharing with you here. A link to it is on the website that is in the chat. If you're watching on Facebook, simondevoyle.com/Suquamish. Something that's happening right now is that the songs that we are playing are changing. When I got ordained, half my class had a huge fight with the seminary over the songs that they played at our commencement ceremony. The songs that were so important to the seminary teachers were received as insulting or not good enough to many of my younger classmates. New voices are being heard and changes are being made. As someone who is in church, I've seen a lot happen with music, scripture, different things are being included. Like you guys don't bat an eyelid when I bring Rumi in to the Bible spot. The songs that we're singing are changing too, and the people that get to speak behind the microphone are becoming more diverse as well. In the churches I go to, a whole lot of the authority is becoming more diverse and inclusive. And we know that there's a backlash against this. People leave, others lobby for conservative laws to be implemented in a fruitless desire to hold back the tide of change. For example, bathroom laws that try and uphold gender integrity. It's a great example of people trying to hold back change. Do you know that the transgender teenagers I befriend and work with, when they go to school, they often skip school because they've got their period and it's so difficult to use the bathroom? Or they hold their pee in for hours and are in pain because of these stupid bathroom rules. Most of us who gather here are trying to learn the new songs, work out which of the rules need to be changes, hear diverse voices, and we're also trying to work out which songs we need to stop singing. But the conversations that we have around this can get heated because we often have different opinions. And we can sometimes find ourselves all of a sudden in difficult conversations where we're misunderstood, perhaps through our own assumptions, or perhaps just because the playing field isn't equal. We don't all have the same experience. And a big reason that we see the world so differently is because our histories are different. The stories that shape us as individuals, families, and communities. These stories, especially of harm and lack of justice, will come up. Let me find my place again. And we're meant to be products of our history. In both good and bad ways, we're products of our history. They shape us. Meanwhile, at the same time, our culture is sweeping things under the rug. And when we sweep stuff under the rug, or as we could say, the elephant in the room, will come out. And notice it's an elephant in the room. First of all, an elephant can't get out of the room because the door is too small. Secondly, it can trash your entire house. It's not a small goat in the corner, it's a white elephant. And why is it white? I think it's really urgent that humans wake up and live in the present moment. Um, Things like the environment or the fact that we have nuclear weapons show us that we really need to wake up quickly. But in that awakening process, we need to remember that the past is present with us in the room. The ancestors are present. In the future, the becoming is present too. And I think it's important for us to think about when we try on the mind of God, God exists outside of time and space. And that part of us exists outside of time and space. Meanwhile, we carry our hopes for the future and our experiences of the past into every single conversation. So rather than trying to fight against history, trying to make it not relevant anymore, we need to welcome yesteryear, to welcome it into the room. It's already here anyway. So one more theological or theoretical thing I'd want to tell you about, comes from my training as a counselor, is the word trauma. Because trauma is important. Now, as soon as any of us is in a conversation with someone and we realize that trauma is present for them, we need to proceed with incredible gentleness and listen as well as we can. The word trauma comes from the Greek word wound. And sometimes in our culture, we're not careful with this word. There's many words that we're not careful with. For example, I've said, I'm starving hundreds of times, but I've never had to walk that shocking road. Same with trauma. So, trauma, what it actually really means is that we experienced an event or a thing that was so deeply dangerous or distressing that we could not cope. It fried our system. And now, all these years later, the wound is not able to heal. So, just so you can understand the difference, when a bad thing happens and you heal, you're not traumatized anymore. A bad thing is not trauma. Trauma is it's a biological, psychological thing that happens. So my point was, when you're in conversation and trauma enters, I think it's good to be as gentle as you can. So I'm going to take off the glasses of theory and theology, and let's look at detail in some of the conversations about dismantling privilege. And the way that we're going to do that first is by me inviting up some special guests. I'm going to ask Kathy to uh, spotlight Jane and Dick. I'm hoping that they're both here. I think I saw Dick earlier, but oh, hi, Jane.
Getting unmuted. Hi.
There. Do you want once Dick comes up? Maybe I'll just hand it over to you to explain what happened and why you brought it to me and ask. Does that sound okay if I leave you two just to have the conversation just now, and then afterwards I'll come back up?
Yeah.
Great. Kathy, will you actually, maybe I can remove myself.
Dick, because my husband's just walking in the door, I need to quiet him for a moment. Could you start?
Sure. Just our situation was that at the annual meeting, I became aware that there were 9 or 8, I think, women on the pastoral selection committee. And I don't actually remember exactly how I phrased the question or the statement, but whatever I said and the way I said it, and triggered all kinds of things in Jane. And she identified there's a couple of other women that were triggered the same way. And she came back with a text or a chat right then that indicated that women have been living with committees made up of all men for a long time, and that it might be important to learn to live with the opposite. And I took that in, I understand that very well and accepted that. And then about a week later, Jane responded to me um, and was quite upset because being a white male, an elder white male, person of privilege, and also having been a past minister of Suquamish Church, that she felt that very strongly that what I have to say, it's kind of like E.F. Hutton, you know, when you speak, people listen, and therefore it influences people just because of the position in life. And because of that, there was a lot of pain, and I'll let Jane reflect on that pain.
Yeah, great. And what I'm really hoping that the congregation hears today is not the details of the words said, but modeling of the process of what happens. You know, I'm representing in this scenario a position of oppression and trauma, and Dick is representing a position of privilege. And so, what happened for me, you know, so what I want people to get is the slowing down and the paying attention to the body, and hopefully a larger awareness when you're in any kind of settings and conversations come up, whether one to one or in groups. Really awareness and tracking of yourself first and foremost. Um, but what happened for me, what I heard was Dick say, "Have you noticed that there's there's 9 women on the search committee?" And then another man said, "Ha ha, yeah, I've noticed that." And then there was a little discussion. But what happened for me was my heart started beating really fast. My vision got very narrow. My body went, I braced. And kind of all this historical trauma that resides in my being, daily microaggressions within the church of being a woman in the church from the time I was a child and being in fundamentalist religions to, you know, current traumas in the last 20 years with being in a progressive church, and just all the scenarios that happen around all the discussions that we've had in the last 20 years. Wonderful progression of being more equitable, but still hurting. And you know, I just was like, in hindsight, because in hindsight, instead of, you know, immediately saying to Dick, well, men, you know, women have had committees of men forever and ever making decisions for them, I wish I'd had the capacity to pause and go and ask a question. Dick, what did you mean by that? But I didn't, because in that moment, I was triggered. I was flooded with the stress hormones. Um, and that's what happens out in the real world all the time. And in so many of the places that we're in. And, you know, in conversations about big traumas and little traumas, you know, the awareness that when we're coming from a place of privilege, which is the world that I walk in most of the time. I mean, there's the intersectionality of being a woman. So I have some experiences of marginalization, but also I'm a white person and I walk with an enormous amount of privilege. This hijack, this sort of amygdala hijack is what it's called, can take place at at any time with anyone that you're talking to. And something that I really wrestle with in the surge meetings, they have a guideline about communicating that says be aware of the impact of your voice. And it's like, wow, what a big task to have. I mean, there's the impact of our voice that we're trying to learn as we become more anti-racist within the church, and how can we use our voice to amplify the voices of others. But there's also the impact of our voice in so many light and unawares moments where we can really cause harm. And then, the bigger question of, oh, well, I'm just not going to say anything ever. Well, that is not the point. And what I appreciate so much about the interaction with Dick is that he did in the meeting immediately reach out in the chat and said, "Can you tell me more about that? I want to hear your voice." And we had a little back and forth in the chat right then. But then about a week later, I did write him, kind of motivated by hearing from a couple other women who had had that similar experience of it just took my breath away. Because I forget that can still happen even in our church. I think we're so progressive and we're so beyond that. But then there it is. And it brings back all that however old you are, all those years of being told that, especially in the religious perspective, that your voice doesn't matter. So that's all I have to say for now. And please, it's not the details of the conversation that we're talking about. It's the unpacking and modeling of what communication could look like in a group scenario, in an individual scenario. We're really being asked to lean in. We're being asked to communicate. We're being asked to change.
Yeah, Dick, can I ask you a question? Which was, when you saw the reaction in Jane, um, and she reacted to you, did you feel hurt?
Certainly not at the annual meeting with the chat. That was just a back and forth. When she wrote me the letter, which was the following Sunday, after church, sometime in the day, she sat down and wrote all of her feelings out. And my first reading of that was, holy cow. And that really hit me hard. And I had some feelings of defensiveness.
Mm-hmm. So when you
And
earlier leaned in and
pardon?
said, can you tell me more about that? The reason you were able to ask that question was because you weren't being defensive. Or do
Ask that
you
again.
have something that allowed you to still say, "Oh, tell me more about that," even when you felt defensive?
No, it actually took me a little while.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Judith is my partner, and I shared it with Judith, and we talked about it a bit. And I think it was Friday, 5 days later, that I responded to Jane.
Mm-hmm.
But before I responded, I read what she wrote again, and I found that it was not nearly as it didn't affect me the same way. After a couple of days, I read it and I thought, wow, that's really thoughtful. And I began thinking about it in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
and began asking myself, first of all, what would I say to someone who's been hurt um, by something I've done?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked myself that question,
Mm-hmm.
and I was asking what I was really afraid of. Why was I commenting at all on this subject?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I realized that, and I shared this with Jane, that I personally felt like I I've been concerned about diversity my whole life, and representative, certainly thought it was inappropriate to have all the leadership male,
Mm-hmm.
and tried to do something about that my whole life. And so I realized I was coming from a place that I was, I guess my greatest concern for the church was its longevity. You know, do
Mm-hmm.
we have enough representation on there to represent what we're really looking for? So I just thought about it from a lot, you know, kind of what was I doing? What was I meaning? Where was I? Why was I even raising the
Mm-hmm.
question?
So that was your
And
internal process. Yes.
so then
Um,
I responded to her on Friday with a letter trying to help her understand just what I just said to you, only in more detail. And and she responded, um, and we had more conversation about it.
mm-hmm.
It was we realized that we'd gotten past the anger with each other or their frustration and the pain that we heard, and we began to communicate. And
Mm-hmm.
then Jane said, well, maybe this could be a good model just to be able to share it with the congregation and say, no, you don't. I, as a person, even though I'm an old white male, I'm not one that's going to be real quiet all the time. But I need to think about what power or impact what I say
Mm-hmm.
has on people.
Absolutely.
And
That's similar
I
to,
feel like
yeah.
I hadn't really done the work that I needed to do to prepare for my inquiry in the first
Mm-hmm.
place.
Mm-hmm. I'm smiling because I know what's coming next, which is a Brene Brown video, which talks so much to many of the things you said. We're short for time, so I just want to, first of all, say thank you for sharing this process. I'm not saying to the congregation, this is a perfect model. I'm saying this is a model of what we're talking about here. And there are things that both Jane and Dick did to be able to come together, work that they did to get over their reactiveness, to hear each other. And Jane, you said earlier about the listening to the impact of our words. I really loved that. Really loved that. Um, so I had other questions, but I'm going to.
I have one
I,
Oh,
more
you
thing
both do.
that I'd like to say, and then Jane would like to say. I just want to say that I think it was extremely important that Jane took the time to express her feelings, because that's, rather than holding them inside, that's what enabled us to be able to get over the hump and to communicate and to not lose our friendship
Mm-hmm.
over being frustrated with one another or whatever. And it was because of her saying, this frustrates me, to get us started.
Thank you, Dick. Jane.
well, and I just wanted to add that, being a woman and in a place in my life where I'm finding my voice more, um, in that moment, I wasn't angry. It was a clear moment of drawing a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
It was a clear moment of drawing a boundary. And I think, our racial justice work in the community, in the world, people of color are drawing a boundary. And um, we need to be able to do our own work and our own processing, and uh, not react to those boundaries with anger and and um, and I mean, one of our next book is Resma Minikin's My Grandmother's Hands. And,
Mm-hmm.
he says, he talks about, if you're this progressive, I'm so woke kind of person, I don't want to talk to you, because you don't want to do the work. You think you're already there.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
so much unpacking, and it's not about the sharks out there. It's about the water we swim in. Um, and in order for us to be in a world in a healing and healthy way, God, we got to do our inner work. We got to do it.
All the
Every one
time,
of us.
over and over. But what's so beautiful is that you guys did that together.
Yes.
That you had the maturity to do that. Um, Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. I hope you smile at the things that Brene Brown is about to explain. You can tell me later. So here's the video. Can you hear that?
We can't be brave if we don't fall. I mean, it's the premise of Daring Great. I mean, of Rising Strong is if we're brave enough often enough, we're going to fall. And so to me, I went into the research asking this question: what do men and women, those men and women who experience falls, disappointment, heartbreak, failure at work, struggle, who get back up on their feet and are more courageous and willing to go in again, what do they have in common? And what I found was there's a process that they all shared in common that they go through. And no one called it the reckoning, the rumble, or the revolution. But as a grounded theory researcher, that's my job, to find words that accurately capture what I'm learning in the research.
And was there a clinical term that you had for those people? Like ass kickers?
Badasses.
Badasses.
Yes, I call them the badasses. Yeah. Because I think we're in a badassery deficit.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
A BAD.
Yeah,
We're in bad shape.
Yeah, we're in bad shape, badassery deficit. Yeah, because we have a lot of people who are blustery and posturing and, acting like they're really tough. But a true badass to me is the person who is in struggle, who looks up and says, I'm hurting and I need help. Or the person who's failed and said, looks at her team and says, we missed it. We didn't do what we said we were going to do. We need to talk through it. We need to take a deep breath. We need to support each other. We need to figure out what the learnings are here and embed those. And then we need to move forward with each other, arm in arm. Those are the badasses to me. The people.
Not like protecting your space and making sure you keep the job.
No.
In your department.
No. I mean, I get the reality of that, but posturing is not badassery. Blustery trash talk is not badassery. Perfectionism, about the furthest thing from badassery you can do. And so to me, I was studying the badasses to figure out what do they have in common, the people who get back up. Which reminds me of that song, Don't Call It a Comeback. Yeah, it's a good one, right?
That's super good.
Yeah. And so what I found is that they have this process, and I called it the Rising Strong process. It's got the reckoning, men and women who get back on their feet, recognize when they're emotionally caught or hooked, when something's going on, and they get curious about it. They don't pretend like it's not happening. They don't take out their emotions on other people. They don't pretend like everything's fine. They're like, whoa, I'm pissed off about something, or man, I cannot stop thinking about this thing on a loop. And they're like, I want to know more. So they get curious. Then they rumble. When something hard happens to us, we are wired for our brain to immediately scramble and make up a story to explain what's happening. Man, Travis Gage just gave me the stink eye. He must have never liked me. We make up a story. The men and women who rise strong, they are very clear about the first stories they make up. They don't deny them. They're like, hey, here's the first place I go. Then they reality check those stories, and they hold that, what I call the shitty first draft story, up against the truth after they're willing to rumble with hard things. Like they're willing to look in and say, the first story I make up is Travis never liked me and he never thought I was smart. And then they start thinking, okay, what are the facts here that I'm basing this on? Or maybe they'll even have the courage to say, hey, Travis, during the middle of that interview, you gave me the stink eye. And the story I made up was that you didn't think my answers were smart. And then you'll look back at me and say, no, dude, I had something in my eye.
Cool.
Right. And then they take those two things and they hold them up against each other. I call it the delta, the difference. What's the delta here between this story that I tell myself and the truth? And the delta is, for me, the first time I get anxious or fearful, I make up that I'm not enough. And I've got work to do there. And the revolution is when we take those answers, the work we have to do, and we start practicing them. And we put this process we turn the process into a practice in our daily lives. That's the revolution. So
That's a big word.
I believe it, and I mean it when I say it. I mean, I think revolution is a big word, but it's what we need. Look, the most dangerous stories we make up are the stories that challenge our lovability, our divinity, and our creativity. Just because someone wasn't able to love us or willing to love us doesn't change how lovable we are. Just because a group of people challenged who we are or what we do or where we're from or who we love and said that we were not divine, that doesn't change our divinity. And just because somewhere along the way we were told we weren't smart or we weren't good artists or we didn't sing well or dance well, doesn't change the fact that we're all creative beings. And so part of the Rising Strong story process is reclaiming those stories and challenging what we make up about ourselves, because maybe we make it up or maybe we were told that somewhere along the way. So let me tell you for sure, you have enough people doing that, you definitely have a revolution on your hands.
I forgot to tell you that she swears quite a lot in that video. Sorry for that lack of heads up. I'm going to close with a prayer. The prayer that I've chosen for this is the prayer of St. Francis. But I set that prayer into song, and that's what I would like to share with you as we digest some of the weight, insight, beauty in what was just shared by Jane and Dick and Brene. Lord, make me a channel of your peace. Grant that I can see through my human pain and still feel loved. In the darkness, let light be found in there. I need light to find me here. Lord, make me a channel of your peace. We all need to learn to forgive a few more 100 times. Melt our hatred and let love take root in our hearts. Lord, make me a channel of your peace. And through my own pain and need, I will learn to understand. Reach through our sorrow, let it be joy. Oh, let it be joy. Amen. We're going to move now into our time of shared prayer as a community, prayers for the people. I'll get my trusty notepad and invite you to here, which I found a beautiful video about passing the peace. And one of the things that I haven't seen done well before. And the only time I've ever heard of passing the peace really being this transforming act was two lesbians who were getting married, who'd been kicked out of their church, who included passing the peace at their wedding. And I was like, whoa, yeah, that's the thing, right? And I saw a COVID friendly version of passing the peace. And I was so taken with it that I copied the video and I wanted to share it with you because it really is, it's a beautiful thing. So let me share that with you. So invite us on the Zoom to do this too, to each other. And then we receive what each other has given and we place it into our hearts. And one time with no words. Amen. May the blessing of God rest upon you, and Christ's peace abide in you, and the Spirit illuminate your heart, now and forevermore. Thank you, everybody. Huge thank you to Jane and Dick. And I have to go because it's 2 minutes past, so my other church are waiting for me. I'll see you in 2 weeks, in 2 Sundays. Okay?